The Grand Heritage Hotel sparkled like a jewel in the downtown skyline. Its marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and guests in expensive suits and designer dresses moved through the lobby like they owned the world. But deep in the back of the building, past the glamorous dining rooms and luxurious suites, was a different world entirely. The kitchen. That's where Danny Torres spent his days and most of his nights. At 28 years old, he'd been washing dishes at the Grand Heritage for almost 6 years. It wasn't the career he'd dreamed about when he was younger, but life had a way of changing plans. The important thing was that it paid the bills. Barely, but it paid them. Tonight was a big event night. Some tech company had rented out the entire grand ballroom for a corporate celebration. That meant hundreds of plates, endless glasses, and mountains of silverware to wash. Danny didn't mind the work. Hard work never bothered him. What bothered him was watching all that food get thrown away. "Torres, stop daydreaming and pick up the pace." Victor's voice cut through the noise of running water and clattering dishes. "We've got 3 more carts of plates coming in, and I want this kitchen spotless by midnight." "Yes, sir," Danny said, scrubbing faster. Victor Morales had been the kitchen supervisor for 2 years, and in that time, he'd made it his personal mission to run the tightest ship possible. Every rule was followed to the letter. Every regulation was enforced without exception. Every employee lived in fear of his write-ups and warnings. Victor liked to say he was just maintaining the hotel's high standards, but most of the staff thought he just enjoyed having power over people. Danny kept his head down and did his work. He couldn't afford to get on Victor's bad side, not with everything depending on this job. Around 10 p.m. the event finally wound down. Danny was assigned to the cleanup crew, which meant collecting all the leftover food and scraping plates. As he pushed his cart through the ballroom, he couldn't help but notice how much food was barely touched. Entire steaks with maybe 1 bite taken out of them, bread rolls that no one had even buttered, desserts that were completely untouched, just sitting there because someone had ordered them and then decided they were too full. All of it was going straight into the trash. Hotel policy. Health and safety regulations, Victor always said when anyone questioned it. We can't save food that's been out on plates. Liability issues. It all gets thrown away, no exceptions. Danny had heard the speech 100 times. He understood the reasoning, sort of. But it still felt wrong, wasteful, especially when he knew there were people who would have been grateful for any of this food. People like his family. He pushed the thought away and focused on his work. Cart after cart of plates went to the dish station. Scrape, stack, spray, load into the industrial dishwasher. Repeat. His hands moved on autopilot while his mind wandered to what was waiting for him at home. What Danny didn't know was that someone had been watching him all evening. A man in a maintenance uniform, someone most of the staff assumed was new, had been observing the kitchen operations carefully. His name was Jim, or at least that's what his temporary ID badge said. In reality, Jim was James Mitchell, and he owned every Grand Heritage hotel in the country. 15 locations, thousands of employees, and a reputation for luxury service. But lately something had been bothering him. Employee turnover was higher than it should be. Anonymous complaints were piling up on the corporate website. People were unhappy, and James needed to understand why. So he'd done something he'd never done before. He'd gone undercover. For the past 3 weeks, he'd been working as a maintenance worker in his own hotels, wearing a fake name tag and keeping his mouth shut. He'd mopped floors, fixed leaky faucets, and observed how his hotels really operated when the boss wasn't around. What he'd found wasn't great. Supervisors who treated employees like servants, managers who cared more about numbers than people. Good workers being ground down by a system that took everything and gave back as little as possible. Tonight, James was watching the kitchen crew. He'd heard complaints about Victor, about how he ran things, and he wanted to see for himself. He'd been standing in the corner for the past hour, pretending to check on a freezer while really observing how the supervisor interacted with his staff. Victor barked orders like a drill sergeant. He criticized more than he praised. When one young worker accidentally dropped a plate, Victor's response wasn't to make sure the kid wasn't cut by the broken glass, it was to threaten him with a write-up for being careless. James made mental notes about everything, but then he noticed something else. The dishwasher, the quiet guy who'd been working non-stop all night, kept glancing at the leftover food. Not the greedy look of someone who wanted to sneak a snack, Something else. Something almost sad. James watched as Danny scraped plate after plate. Perfectly good food sliding into the trash can. The guy's jaw was tight, like he was forcing himself not to think about it. Then around 11:30, when Victor left to check on something in the front of house, James saw Danny's behavior change. The dishwasher looked around carefully, making sure no one was watching. Then, quickly and quietly, he took several pieces of bread and wrapped them in napkins. A moment later, some pieces of steak that were barely touched. Then some desserts that hadn't even been cut into. All of it disappeared into a plastic bag that Danny had hidden in his work locker. James felt anger rise in his chest. Was this guy stealing food? Planning to resell it? This was exactly the kind of employee behavior that gave hotels a bad name. He'd trusted his staff, paid them fairly. Well, he thought he paid them fairly, and this is what he got in return. He was about to step forward and confront the situation when something made him stop. The look on Danny's face. It wasn't the expression of someone doing something selfish or greedy. It was desperation mixed with shame. And the way he'd looked around, so careful, so scared of being caught, it reminded James of something, though he couldn't quite place what. Victor came back into the kitchen, and Danny immediately returned to his normal work, acting like nothing had happened. The plastic bag stayed hidden in his locker. James decided to wait. He'd report this to himself tomorrow, but something told him there was more to this story. In his 20 years of running hotels, he'd learned that things weren't always what they seemed on the surface. And his gut was telling him that this quiet dishwasher had a reason for what he was doing. The rest of the shift passed without incident. At midnight, Victor finally dismissed the crew. Good work tonight, people. Torres, you're closing tomorrow, too. Don't be late. Yes, sir, Danny said, heading to the locker room. James watched as Danny changed out of his work clothes and carefully placed the plastic bag into his backpack. The guy looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped with tiredness. He wasn't the picture of a criminal. He looked like someone who'd been carrying the weight of the world for too long. As Danny headed out the back employee exit, James made a split-second decision. Instead of going home like he'd planned, he was going to follow this guy. He needed to know the truth before he ruined someone's life based on assumptions. The night air was cold as James followed at a distance. Danny walked instead of taking the bus, which struck James as odd. The bus stop was right there, and it was late. Most people would want to get home as quickly as possible. But Danny walked, his backpack slung over one shoulder, moving through the downtown streets like he had a specific destination in mind. James kept his distance, staying in the shadows, feeling slightly ridiculous for following an employee, but unable to shake the feeling that this was important. They walked for 15 minutes, leaving the nice part of downtown and entering a neighborhood that was rougher around the edges. The buildings here were old, paint peeling, windows cracked. This was where people lived when they didn't have many choices. Danny stopped in front of a rundown apartment building and climbed the stairs to the third floor. James positioned himself where he could see but wouldn't be spotted. He watched Danny unlock a door and disappear inside. Through a window, James could see into the small apartment, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The assumptions he'd made, the anger he'd felt, the judgment he'd been ready to pass, all of it crumbled in an instant as he finally understood the truth. James stood in the shadows outside the apartment building, his heart pounding as he watched through the window. What he saw made him forget all about company policies and stolen food. Inside the cramped apartment, Danny was unpacking the food from his backpack. But he wasn't eating it himself. An elderly woman lay in a hospital bed that took up most of the tiny living room. She looked frail, her skin pale, connected to what appeared to be an oxygen tank. Next to her at a small wobbly table sat a young boy doing homework under a dim lamp. "Tio Danny," the boy jumped up, his face lighting up like Christmas morning. "You brought food." Danny smiled, though James could see the exhaustion in every line of his face. "Hey, buddy. How was school today?" "Good. I got an A on my spelling test." The boy was maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes that looked a little too big for him, probably hand-me-downs. "That's my guy," Danny said, ruffling the kid's hair. He started unwrapping the food carefully, arranging it on actual plates like it was a fancy meal instead of leftovers he'd taken from the trash. The elderly woman tried to sit up a bit. "Mijo, you didn't have to. Mom, don't try to move. Let me help you." Danny adjusted her pillows gently with the kind of patience that comes from doing something 1,000 times. I brought the good stuff tonight. There was a big event, lots of leftovers. There's even chocolate cake. The boy's eyes went wide. Real chocolate cake? The fancy kind, Danny said, and the pride in his voice mixed with something else. Sadness, maybe, or shame that this was how he had to feed his family. James watched as Danny heated up the food in a microwave that looked older than the boy. The apartment was clean but painfully bare. There was almost no furniture besides the hospital bed, the small table, and one worn couch. The refrigerator, when Danny opened it, was nearly empty. Some milk, a few eggs, bread. That was it. Danny served his mother first, cutting the meat into tiny pieces and helping her eat. Her hands shook too much to hold the fork herself. Then he made a plate for the boy, who ate like he hadn't seen food in days, which, James realized with a sinking feeling, might actually be true. Only after both of them were eating did Danny make himself a small plate. The smallest portion? Whatever was left. Did you eat at work, mijo? His mother asked weakly. Danny nodded, which James knew was a lie. He'd watched Danny work straight through his break, never stopping, never going to the employee cafeteria. James felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't theft. This was survival. This was a man taking food that was literally headed for the garbage to keep his family from going hungry. He backed away from the window, his mind racing. He needed to know more. He needed to understand how one of his employees had ended up in this situation. The next morning, James did something he wasn't proud of but felt necessary. Using his CEO access from his real office across town, he pulled Danny's employee file. What he found made everything worse. Danny Torres, 6 years with the company, perfect attendance record, 0 complaints, multiple commendations from previous supervisors for reliability and hard work. Current position, dishwasher, night shift. Salary, minimum wage plus a small shift differential for working nights. The emergency contact section told a bigger story. Mother, Rosa Torres. Guardian of Leo Torres' nephew, age 8. There was a note added 2 years ago updating his status as legal guardian. James dug deeper, feeling more like a stalker than a CEO but unable to stop himself. Public records showed that Danny had once been enrolled in college studying engineering. But he'd dropped out 6 years ago right after his father died. That's when he'd started at the hotel. More searching revealed the real gut punch. Rosa Torres had stage 4 cancer. Her medical bills were astronomical, even with basic insurance. And 2 years ago, Danny's sister and her husband had died in a car accident, leaving their son Leo orphaned. Danny had taken him in without hesitation. James sat back in his office chair, staring at the computer screen. Danny was supporting 3 people on a dishwasher's salary, minimum wage, in one of the most expensive cities in the country, with medical bills that would crush most families even with good insurance, and the employee assistance program. James checked the records. Danny had applied twice. Both applications had been denied by Victor, marked as not urgent and applicant can manage on current salary. James felt rage building in his chest. Not at Danny, at himself. At the system he'd created. At supervisors like Victor who saw employees as numbers instead of people, but he wasn't ready to reveal himself yet. He needed to understand more. So that evening he went back to the hotel as Jim, ready to observe more closely. Over the next few days, James watched Danny like a hawk. The guy was always the first to volunteer for extra work. Always stayed late when asked. Never complained, never caused problems. During breaks, while other employees ate in the cafeteria or went outside to smoke, Danny would sit alone, often just drinking water and looking at his phone. James started timing his own breaks to coincide with Danny's. On the 3rd day, he worked up the courage to start a conversation. Hey man, I'm Jim, he said, sitting down at the small table where Danny was looking at his phone. Started in maintenance a few weeks ago. Danny looked up, surprised someone was talking to him. Oh, hey, I'm Danny. Dishwasher. Rough shift tonight, huh? They're all rough, Danny said with a tired smile. But that's okay. Honest work, you know? James nodded. You eat yet? Employee meal looked pretty good today. Nah, I ate before I came in. Another lie, James knew. Trying to save money where I can. I get that, James said carefully. Money's tight for everyone these days. Danny just nodded, looking back at his phone. James glanced at the screen and saw a medical portal. Bills and appointment reminders. You okay? James asked. Yeah, just family stuff. My mom's not doing great. Doctor appointments and all that. Danny locked his phone quickly like he'd revealed too much. But we're managing. Always do. Something in those words, always do, hit James hard. This was a guy who'd been managing for years, holding everything together with duct tape and determination, never asking for help, just quietly doing what needed to be done. Over the next week, James observed more. He noticed that Danny always took the closing shift on event nights because that's when the most food got thrown away. He saw the careful way Danny would wrap food in napkins, his hands shaking slightly, always looking over his shoulder for Victor. One night, James witnessed something that made his blood boil. Victor caught Danny looking at a tray of leftover food from a wedding reception. Not touching it, not taking it, just looking. Don't even think about it, Torres, Victor snapped, appearing out of nowhere like he'd been waiting to catch Danny doing something wrong. I've got my eye on you. One wrong move and you're out of here. We have standards to maintain. Danny's face went pale. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. I was just cleaning up. Make sure that's all you're doing, Victor said coldly. I've worked too hard to build a clean operation here to have dishwashers stealing from us. After Victor walked away, James watched Danny's shoulders slump. The guy looked defeated, scared, exhausted. And James realized something important. Danny wasn't just taking food to feed his family. He was risking the only job he had, the only income supporting 3 people because he had no other choice. That night, James followed Danny home again. He watched through the window as Danny unpacked food for his mother and nephew. The boy was doing homework again, his small face scrunched up in concentration. Rosa was having a bad day, coughing weakly, barely able to eat. Danny helped his mother with her medication, checked Leo's homework, and then sat on the floor because there wasn't enough furniture for everyone to sit comfortably. He ate his small portion quietly while Leo chatted about his day at school. Tio Danny, when's Mom coming back? Leo asked suddenly. The room went quiet. Danny's face showed pain so raw that James had to look away. Buddy, remember what we talked about? Your mom and dad, they're not coming back. But they're watching over you. And I'm here. Grandma's here. We're your family now. I know, Leo said quietly. I just miss them. I miss them too, Danny said, pulling the boy into a hug. James turned away from the window, his eyes burning. He'd seen enough. More than enough. This wasn't about company policy or theft or rules. This was about a good man drowning in circumstances beyond his control, trying to keep his family afloat with nothing but determination and love. Tomorrow, things were going to change. James was going to make sure of it. But first, he needed to approach this carefully. Danny was proud, that was clear. He wasn't asking for charity or handouts. He was doing everything he could to take care of his family with dignity. James had to find a way to help without making Danny feel like he was being pitied. And he needed to deal with Victor, who clearly had no idea what his employees were going through and didn't seem to care. As James walked back to his car, he pulled out his phone and started making notes. Plans were forming in his mind. Big plans. Plans that would change not just Danny's life, but the entire way his hotels operated. Because if one employee was suffering like this, how many others were going through similar struggles? How many other people were slipping through the cracks while supervisors like Victor worried more about rules than humanity? James had built his empire on luxury and service. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten who made that luxury possible. The dishwashers, the housekeepers, the maintenance workers. The people who showed up every day, worked hard, and barely survived on what he paid them. That was about to change. All of it. But first, he needed to have a conversation with Danny. A real one. And he needed to do it right. James spent the next 2 days planning his approach. He couldn't just walk up to Danny and reveal who he was. The guy would panic, probably think he was getting fired, and James wanted to understand everything before he made his move. So he did what he'd been doing all along. He observed, he listened, and he learned. On Tuesday afternoon, he timed his break to match Danny's again. This time he brought 2 coffees from the fancy machine in the executive break room. The one employees weren't supposed to use, but James figured he owned the place. So who was going to stop him? Hey, Danny, he said, setting one of the cups down. Got you a coffee? Hope you like it with cream and sugar because I already made it. Danny looked at the cup like it was a bomb. Oh, you didn't have to do that. Come on, take it. It's just coffee. James sat down across from him. You look like you could use it. We all could after the shift Victor's been putting us through. That got a small smile. Danny took the cup carefully. Thanks. That's really nice of you. They sat in comfortable silence for a minute, both sipping their coffee. James noticed Danny's hands again. They were rough, scarred from years of washing dishes, burns from hot water, cuts from broken glass. Working hands. Can I ask you something? James said casually. And you can tell me to mind my own business if you want. Danny looked wary but nodded. Why do you work so many double shifts? I've been here a few weeks and I swear you're here every time I show up. Danny was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Family needs me to. My mom's sick and I'm taking care of my nephew. Bills don't pay themselves. That's rough, man. What about your wife? Your own kids? They must miss you being gone so much. No wife. No kids, just my mom and Leo, that's my nephew. And honestly, I'm lucky to have this job. Danny's voice was completely sincere. Mr. Mitchell, the guy who owns these hotels, I heard he's a decent man. Built this whole company from nothing. The pay's not great, but it's steady, and that's what matters. James felt each word like a knife. Here was Danny, struggling to survive on poverty wages, praising the man who was paying those wages. The guy had no idea he was sitting across from that very person. You ever think about looking for something better? James asked carefully. Danny shrugged. Sure, sometimes. But I dropped out of college when my dad died. I needed to work right away. And then things just kept happening. My sister's accident. Mom getting sick. By the time I looked up, 6 years had gone by and I was still washing dishes. He paused, then added quickly, not that there's anything wrong with washing dishes. It's honest work. My dad always said honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. Your dad sounds like he was a smart man. He was the best, Danny said, his voice getting thick. He worked 3 jobs to put me through school. Wanted me to be an engineer, have a better life than he did. And then he had a heart attack at 52. Just dropped dead at work one day. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. Danny finished his coffee and stood up. Thanks for this, really, but I should get back. Victor doesn't like us taking long breaks. Danny, wait, James said. I know this might sound weird, but if you ever need anything, want to talk or whatever, I'm around. Sometimes it helps to have someone listen. Danny looked at him with surprise, like he wasn't used to people offering kindness without wanting something in return. Thanks, Jim, that means a lot. After Danny left, James sat there thinking. He'd learned more in that 10-minute conversation than he had from any employee survey or corporate report. Danny wasn't asking for a handout. He wasn't complaining about his situation. He was just trying to survive with dignity. That evening, James made another decision. As CEO, he pulled the full financial records for his hotel chain. What he found made him sick. His company was incredibly profitable. The hotels brought in millions every year. His executives were well paid, including himself. But the wages for housekeepers, dishwashers, and other support staff had barely increased in a decade. He looked at the numbers for healthcare benefits. They were minimal, barely covering basic care, certainly not enough for someone dealing with cancer treatments, and the employee assistance program that Danny had tried to use. It had a budget of almost nothing, and supervisors like Victor had complete authority to deny requests without oversight. James had always thought he was running an ethical company. He'd focused on guest satisfaction, luxury experiences, 5-star ratings, but he'd never looked at what it actually cost his employees to make that luxury possible. The next day, he came back to work as Jim with a new plan. He needed to see Victor in action more closely. He needed to understand just how bad the management problem was. He didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, one of the housekeepers, a woman named Carmen who was about 60 years old, came to Victor asking if she could leave an hour early. Her grandson was in a school play and she'd promised to be there. You're scheduled until 6, Victor said flatly, not even looking up from his clipboard. If you leave early, that's an unexcused absence. 3 of those and you're terminated. But I requested this weeks ago, Carmen said, her voice shaking. I put it in the system, not my problem. Should have requested it sooner. We're short-staffed and everyone needs to pull their weight. James watched Carmen's face crumble. She walked away, pulling out her phone to call her grandson and break the news. Through the doorway, he could hear her making excuses, promising she'd come to the next one, her voice thick with tears. Something in James snapped. He followed Victor into the supply room where the supervisor was doing inventory. Hey, Victor, James said. Can I ask you something? Victor glanced at him with barely concealed annoyance. What is it, Jim? I'm busy. Why didn't you let Carmen leave early? We're not that short-staffed. I could have covered her rooms. Because if I let one person leave early, everyone will want special treatment. Rules are rules. That's how you maintain discipline. But it was her grandson's school play. That's important. Victor turned to face him fully, his expression hard. Let me tell you something about this business, Jim. You seem like a nice guy, but you're new, so you don't understand yet. These people will take advantage of any kindness you show them. You give an inch, they take a mile. I run a tight operation here because that's what Mr. Mitchell expects. Excellent standards, not a bunch of employees running off whenever they feel like it. You really think that's what Mr. Mitchell wants? People missing their grandkids' plays? Mr. Mitchell wants his hotels to run smoothly and profitably. That's what I deliver. The employees get their paychecks. That's the deal. They don't like it, they can work somewhere else. James had to physically stop himself from revealing his identity right then and there, but he managed to keep his cool. What about Danny Torres? The dishwasher. I heard he applied for assistance twice and got denied. Victor's eyes narrowed. You're awfully interested in things that aren't your business. Just curious. Guy seems to work hard. Torres is fine. He works, he gets paid. His personal problems aren't the company's concern. We're not a charity. Victor went back to his clipboard. Now, if you don't mind, I've got work to do. And so do you. James left before he said something he couldn't take back. But now he knew exactly what he was dealing with. Victor wasn't just strict. He was cruel. He'd taken the concept of professional management and turned it into something cold and heartless. That night, James didn't follow Danny home. Instead, he went back to his real office and started making calls. He called his head of HR, his CFO, his operations director. He told them all the same thing. Clear your schedule for tomorrow. We're having an emergency meeting at the Grand Heritage Hotel. Then he made one more call, this one to his lawyer. I need to know exactly what I can and can't do regarding employee compensation and benefits. And I need to know tonight. By midnight, James had a plan. It was going to be expensive. It was going to require major changes. Some of his executives would push back, worried about profit margins and quarterly reports. But James didn't care. He'd built this company to be successful, yes, but not at the cost of people's humanity. Not at the cost of good employees like Danny working themselves to death and still not being able to feed their families. Not at the cost of grandmothers missing their grandson's school plays. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. But first, he needed to have a conversation with Danny. A real one, where he stopped hiding behind a fake name and faced the truth of what his company had become. He just hoped Danny would understand. And more than that, he hoped Danny would give him a chance to make things right. James looked at the clock. 2 a.m. Danny would be at work in 5 hours, starting another double shift, probably planning how to sneak more food home without getting caught by Victor. Not for much longer, James promised himself. Not for much longer. He picked up his phone and typed out a message to his assistant. Schedule a company-wide meeting at the Grand Heritage Hotel tomorrow at 2 p.m. All staff required to attend. No exceptions. Then he added one more line. And someone find me Danny Torres before the meeting. I need to talk to him first. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was going to be one of the most important days of his life. Not because of business deals or profit margins, but because he was finally going to do what he should have done years ago. Take care of the people who took care of his business. Danny was halfway through his morning shift when someone from HR came looking for him. A woman in a professional suit carrying a tablet, scanning the kitchen like she was searching for someone specific. Danny Torres? She called out. Danny's stomach dropped. HR never came looking for dishwashers unless something was very wrong. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked over, his heart pounding. That's me, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. You need to come with me, please. Someone wants to speak with you. Am I in trouble? The words came out before he could stop them. The woman's expression softened slightly. No, nothing like that. Just come with me. Victor appeared from nowhere as usual. Torres, what's going on? You're in the middle of a shift. I'm taking him for a meeting, the HR woman said, her tone leaving no room for argument. It's been approved. Danny followed her through the hotel, his mind racing through every possible scenario. Had someone reported him for taking the food? Had they checked the security cameras? Was he about to lose his job? He thought about Leo, about his mom's medication that was due for refill next week, about the rent that was already late. They went up in the elevator, higher and higher. Danny had never been past the second floor. The maintenance areas, the kitchens, the break rooms, that was his world. But now they were going to the 10th floor, where the executive offices were. The HR woman led him to a conference room and opened the door. "Go ahead in." Danny stepped inside and froze. Sitting at the big table was Jim, the maintenance guy, the one who'd bought him coffee and been nice to him. But something was different. Jim was wearing an expensive suit now, not the maintenance uniform. And sitting next to him were several other people in business attire, all looking official and serious. "Danny, please sit down," Jim said, gesturing to a chair. Danny sat, confused and terrified. "Jim, what's going on? Why are you dressed like that?" Jim took a deep breath. "Because Jim isn't my real name. I'm James Mitchell. I own this hotel. All of them, actually." The room tilted. Danny gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. You're Mr. Mitchell?" "I am. And before you panic, you're not in trouble. I promise you that. But I need to explain some things, and I need you to listen. Can you do that?" Danny couldn't speak. He just nodded. "For the past month, I've been working undercover in my hotels, trying to understand why so many employees were unhappy. I've been mopping floors, fixing things, watching how the hotels really operate when the boss isn't around." James leaned forward. "And 3 weeks ago, I was at this hotel in the kitchen and I saw you take food from the cleanup." Danny's face went white. His hand started shaking. "Sir, I can explain." "I know," James said gently. "I followed you home that night. I saw your mother. I saw your nephew. I saw that tiny apartment and the empty refrigerator and the hospital bed taking up the whole living room." Tears started rolling down Danny's face before he could stop them. "Please don't fire me. I know it was wrong. I know it's against policy, but that food was going in the trash anyway, and Leo is growing. He needs to eat. And my mom can barely keep anything down, but sometimes the fancy food is easier on her stomach, and I just..." His voice broke. "Please, I need this job. I'll pay back whatever you think the food was worth. I'll work extra shifts. Just please don't fire me." "Danny, stop," James said firmly. "You're not being fired. You're not in trouble. I'm the one who should be apologizing to you." Danny wiped his eyes, confused. "What?" "I pulled your employee file. I saw that you've been with us for 6 years. Perfect attendance. 0 complaints. Multiple commendations. You're one of the best employees we have. And you know what else I found? That you applied twice for our employee assistance program and got denied both times. Victor said I didn't qualify, that other people needed it more." James's jaw tightened. Victor was wrong. And I'm going to deal with that. But first, I need you to understand something. You shouldn't have been in that position in the first place. No employee of mine should be taking food from the trash to feed their family. That's not your failure. That's mine." "I don't understand," Danny said quietly. One of the other executives, a woman with kind eyes, spoke up. "What Mr. Mitchell is trying to say is that we've failed you. The wages we pay aren't enough for people to live on. Our benefits don't cover real medical emergencies. Our assistance programs are too small and too difficult to access. We've been so focused on profits and guest satisfaction that we forgot about the people who make it all possible. I've spent the last 2 days reviewing everything," James continued. "Your salary, your benefits, the resources available to you, and I've realized that what we've been paying you is shameful. You work harder than most people I know, and you're barely surviving. That ends today." Danny just stared at him, unable to process what he was hearing. James slid a folder across the table. "I want to offer you a new position. We're creating a new role called Employee Wellness Coordinator. Your job would be to work with HR to identify employees who are struggling and make sure they get the help they need, to be a bridge between management and staff, to prevent what happened to you from happening to anyone else." "But I'm just a dishwasher," Danny said. "I don't have any qualifications for something like that." "You have the most important qualification," James said. "You understand what it's like to struggle. You know what employees face because you've lived it. Everything else we can teach you." He tapped the folder. "Open it." Danny opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a job offer letter. When he saw the salary, he had to read it 3 times because it didn't seem real. It was more than triple what he was making. There were benefits listed. Health insurance that would actually cover things, dental, vision, and something called family medical coverage. "What's family medical coverage?" Danny asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It means your mother's cancer treatments would be covered," the kind-eyed woman explained. "All of them. Chemotherapy, radiation, medications, hospital stays, everything. And your nephew would be covered too." Danny's hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped the papers. "This can't be real. Things like this don't happen to people like me." "They should," James said. "They should happen to good people who work hard and take care of their families. That's exactly who deserves this." He paused. "There's more. Look at the next page." Danny turned the page and saw something about an education fund. "What's this?" "We're starting a scholarship program for employees' children. Leo would qualify. When he's ready for college, it would be paid for." All of it. That's when Danny completely broke down. He put his head in his hands and sobbed, his whole body shaking. Years of stress, of fear, of barely holding on, it all came pouring out. James got up and put a hand on his shoulder, not saying anything, just being there. After a few minutes, Danny managed to pull himself together. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't usually—" "You have nothing to apologize for," James said. "Take your time." Danny wiped his face with his sleeve. "Why are you doing this, really? You could just fire me and hire someone else. You don't owe me anything. Because 3 weeks ago I watched you risk everything to feed your family. I saw you take food that was going in the trash because you had no other choice. And instead of asking for help or complaining or giving up, you just quietly did what you had to do." James sat back down. "That's character, Danny. That's the kind of person I want working for me. The kind of person I want representing what this company should be. But I broke the rules. I took food without permission. You know what else I learned?" James said. "That policy about throwing away all leftover food? It's stupid, and it's going to change. Starting today, any food that would be thrown away will be donated to shelters and food banks. And employees who need it can take it home. No more waste. No more people going hungry while perfectly good food goes in the trash." Danny looked around the room at all the executives. "Is this really happening? This isn't some kind of joke?" The kind-eyed woman smiled. "It's really happening. And there's going to be a lot more changes. We're raising the minimum wage for all employees across all our hotels. We're improving benefits. We're completely overhauling how we support our staff." "When would I start?" Danny asked, still not quite believing any of this. "That's up to you," James said. "Take the weekend to think about it. Talk to your family. But Danny, I really hope you say yes, because I think you can help us change things for a lot of people." Danny looked down at the papers again, at the salary that would let him buy food instead of taking leftovers, at the insurance that would cover his mother's treatments, at the scholarship fund for Leo, at the chance to actually make a difference instead of just surviving. "I don't need the weekend," he said, his voice stronger now. "I'll do it, yes, absolutely yes." James smiled, a real, genuine smile, and reached across to shake Danny's hand. "Welcome to the team. The real team this time." As Danny left the conference room an hour later after signing papers and asking a million questions and still not quite believing any of it was real, he pulled out his phone. He needed to call his mother. To tell Leo. To share this impossible, wonderful, life-changing news. But first, he just stood in the hallway for a moment, looking out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there were other people like him. Other employees struggling to survive, taking food from trash cans, choosing between medicine and rent, working themselves to exhaustion and still falling short. And now he had a chance to help them, to make sure no one else had to live the way he had been living. Danny wiped his eyes one more time, straightened his shoulders, and headed for the elevator. He had a phone call to make. And then he had work to do, real work. Important work. Work that actually mattered. 3 months had passed since that day in the conference room, and Danny still sometimes woke up thinking it had all been a dream. But then he'd look around his new apartment. The one with actual furniture, the one where Leo had his own bedroom, the one with a refrigerator full of food, and he'd remember it was all real. Today was special, though. Today was the big company-wide meeting where James was announcing all the changes to every hotel in the chain. Danny had been part of planning it, working with HR and management to roll out the new programs. But there was still one part of the plan that James had kept secret, even from him. The ballroom at the Grand Heritage Hotel was packed. Every single employee was there, from housekeepers to managers, maintenance workers to chefs. There had to be at least 300 people. Danny stood near the back, still not quite comfortable being in the spotlight, even though his new role meant he had to get used to it. James walked onto the stage and the room went quiet. He looked different than he had as Jim, the maintenance worker. More polished, more professional, but his eyes were the same, kind and genuine. "Thank you all for coming," James started. "I know taking time away from your duties is inconvenient, but what I have to say is important. It's about the future of this company and about every single person in this room." He clicked a remote, and a slide appeared on the screen behind him. It showed a photo of the hotel's kitchen, dishes stacked high, staff working hard. 3 months ago, I did something I've never done before. I went undercover in my own hotels. I worked as a maintenance person, using a fake name, trying to understand why so many of you were unhappy. And what I found shocked me. The room was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I found good people working themselves to exhaustion for wages that barely covered rent. I found employees choosing between medicine and food. I found supervisors who cared more about rules than humanity. And I found that while my hotels were making millions in profit, the people who made that profit possible were struggling to survive. James paused, letting his words sink in. Danny could see people nodding, some wiping their eyes. I thought I was running an ethical company. I was wrong. And I'm here today to tell you that things are changing. Starting now. Another slide appeared. This one showed numbers. New wage scales. Effective immediately, we're raising the minimum wage across all our properties by 40%. That's not a typo. 40%. Because the current wages are simply not enough to live on with dignity. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People started whispering to each other in disbelief. Second, we're completely overhauling our healthcare benefits. Every employee, regardless of position, will have access to comprehensive medical, dental, and vision insurance. And that includes coverage for your families. More murmurs, louder this time. Danny saw Carmen, the housekeeper who'd missed her grandson's play, crying openly. Third, we're creating an education fund for employees' children. If you work for this company and your child wants to go to college, we'll help make that happen. The room erupted in applause. James waited for it to die down before continuing. But here's the thing. These changes aren't happening because I'm some generous hero. They're happening because I failed you. I built a company focused on luxury and service for our guests, but I forgot about serving the people who work here. That's on me, and I'm committed to making it right. James looked directly at the back of the room at Danny. I learned these lessons from one of our employees, someone who showed me what real character looks like. Danny Torres, can you come up here, please? Danny's heart stopped. This wasn't part of the plan, at least not the plan he knew about. But James was gesturing for him to come to the stage, and everyone was turning to look at him. Somehow Danny's feet carried him forward. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever. When he got there, James put a hand on his shoulder. 3 months ago, I caught Danny taking food from the trash, James said, and Danny felt his face burn with embarrassment. I was angry at first. I thought he was stealing. But then I followed him home and I learned the truth. James told the whole story, about Rosa's cancer, about Leo being orphaned, about Danny working double shifts and still not being able to afford food, about the applications for assistance that got denied, about how Danny had been risking his job every night just to feed his family. Danny didn't ask for help. He didn't complain. He just quietly did what he had to do to take care of the people he loved. And when I offered him a better position, you know what he said? He said he didn't deserve it, that he was just a dishwasher. James turned to face Danny directly. But that's exactly why you deserved it. Because you have something that can't be taught in any business school. You have heart. You have integrity. And you understand struggle in a way that I never could. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Danny is now our Director of Employee Wellness, and over the past 3 months he's helped identify 47 employees who were facing serious hardships. 47 people who were suffering in silence. Because of Danny, those people are getting help, real help. James pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. But there's one more thing. Danny, you've been so focused on helping everyone else that you haven't asked for anything for yourself. So I'm giving you something whether you ask for it or not. He handed Danny the envelope. Danny opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter and what looked like legal documents. That's the deed to your apartment, James explained. You've been renting month to month, always worried about being evicted. Now you own it, free and clear. Your mom and Leo will always have a home no matter what happens." Danny couldn't see through his tears. The envelope fell from his hands as he broke down, and James caught him, letting him cry on his shoulder while 300 employees stood and applauded. It took Danny a few minutes to pull himself together. When he finally could speak, he took the microphone with trembling hands. "I don't know what to say," he started, his voice cracking. "3 months ago, I was taking food from the trash. I was terrified every single day that I'd get caught and lose my job. I was choosing which bills to pay and which ones to let go. I was watching my mom get sicker and not being able to afford her treatment. I felt like I was drowning and no one could see me." He looked out at the crowd, at all the faces looking back at him. "And I know some of you feel like that right now. Like you're invisible. Like you're working as hard as you can and it's still not enough. Like one bad break would destroy everything." Danny wiped his eyes. "But I want you to know something. You're not invisible. Not anymore. Mr. Mitchell sees you. I see you. And we're going to make sure you get what you deserve. Not charity. Not handouts. Just fair treatment. Just dignity. Just a chance to work hard and actually be able to take care of your families." The applause was deafening. People were crying, hugging each other, celebrating. Danny saw Victor standing in the corner looking uncomfortable. James had reassigned him to a position with no authority over people, which seemed fitting. After the meeting ended, employees came up to Danny one by one. Some thanked him. Some shared their own stories of struggle. One woman told him she'd been sleeping in her car because she couldn't afford rent and the hotel wages. Danny made a note to help her first thing Monday morning. That evening, Danny went home to his apartment. His apartment. The one he owned. Rosa was sitting up in bed looking better than she had in months. The new insurance had covered a treatment that was actually working. She wasn't cured. The doctors said she might never be fully cured, but she was stable. She was comfortable. She was smiling. Leo ran up and hugged him. "Tio Danny, look what I made at school." He showed off a drawing of their family standing in front of a house. 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's beautiful, buddy," Danny said, his throat tight. "The teacher asked us to draw our family doing something we're thankful for," Leo explained. "I drew us at home, because we have a real home now, and we're all together." Danny looked around the apartment, at his mom in her bed, comfortable and cared for, at Leo, happy and healthy and doing well in school, at the refrigerator covered in Leo's drawings and report cards, at the table where they ate dinner together every night now, real meals that Danny could actually afford to buy. His phone buzzed, a text from James. "Great job today, you're changing lives, Danny, never forget that." Danny thought about how far he'd come. From scraping plates and sneaking food and napkins to standing on a stage and speaking to hundreds of people. From barely surviving to actually living. From feeling invisible to being seen. But the thing that mattered most wasn't the job or the money or even the apartment, as grateful as he was for all of it. It was the chance to help other people who were where he'd been. To make sure no one else had to take food from the trash to feed their family. To be the person he'd needed when he was drowning. "What are you thinking about?" Rosa asked, watching him from her bed. "Just how lucky we are," Danny said, settling onto the couch next to Leo, who immediately snuggled up against him. "How one person seeing us, really seeing us, changed everything. God works in mysterious ways," Rosa said softly. "Yeah," Danny agreed. "He really does." As Leo drifted off to sleep against his shoulder, Danny thought about all the employees he'd helped over the past 3 months. The single dad who couldn't afford his daughter's asthma medication. The older woman working 2 jobs to support her disabled son. The young guy sending money back to his family in another country. All of them had stories. All of them were working hard and struggling anyway. And now, because one CEO had taken the time to look beyond the surface because he'd seen Danny taking food and decided to understand why instead of just punish, all of their lives were getting better. Danny had learned something important through all of this. Sometimes the people who look like they're breaking the rules are actually just trying to survive. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when the rules themselves are broken. He kissed the top of Leo's head and closed his eyes, more grateful than he'd ever been in his life. Tomorrow he'd go back to work, back to helping people, back to making sure that everyone who worked at the Grand Heritage Hotel chain was treated with dignity and respect. But tonight, he was just going to sit here with his family, in his home, and be thankful that someone finally saw him.